Good afternoon, and welcome back to the Express Sessions for 2019. We're very happy to be back here at the American Hotel. Ted and Mary, Julian, Chef Jonathan here, their whole team has been so welcoming to us, and I just want to thank them first and foremost how much we appreciate being here for all they've done for the community. We started these conversations because we saw a need, frankly, to bring members of the community together to deal with some important issues that we're facing, deal with them head on. A civil conversation sitting here over lunch is about as civil as it comes. So we're happy to come back this year and be doing them again. We wouldn't be here if not for the help of our sponsors, who I would like to read quickly and thank them for their support, and we can show some appreciation after I've read the list. Our lead sponsors are the Sag Harbor Chamber of Commerce, which is represented with a table of business leaders here. The Law Office of John J. Leonard, thank you, John. The Sag Harbor Variety Store. Lisa Field is not here today, but she's been incredibly supportive of us, and I'd like to thank her as well. Our session leaders are BNB Bank, the Adam Miller Group. Both Adam and Brian DeSessa are here with us today. Saybrook Capital, thank you, Luke Babcock, who's here. Dayton Ritz and Osborne Insurance, and the Washwick Agency. Also, thank you to our session partners, which are Burke & Sullivan, Fisher's Home Furnishings, JCP Landscaping, Save Sag Harbor, the Sag Harbor Inn, and the law offices of Tiffany Scarlato. Thank you all very much. And lastly, I want to thank the folks at LTV who provide some technical support for us. They film these sessions and they help us reach a larger audience, which is important. We also cover these issues in the newspaper next week so that the people who aren't here in this room can hear about what we've been talking about. A couple quick things I want to talk about for the future. Our next session is on February 22nd back here. It's going to focus on affordable housing. This is an issue that we started these with last year, and we're coming back a year later. We're going to bring both town supervisors back and their housing experts to see what kind of progress has been made. That's an issue that's kind of wrapped up in everything we always talk about, the need to actually have people living here. And then on March 7th, we're going to have an event. We're moving these to Bay Street Theater. We're going to talk about the future of Sag Harbor's Main Street, basically. A lot of changes, a lot of closings here, and we want to, again, bring as many people in as possible to talk about, not complain about the past, but hopefully look towards the future. And we are offering tickets to that right now to our newspaper subscribers and members of the Chamber of Commerce, and they will go on sale to everybody else in February. So I'd like to now move on to today's important conversation. It's kind of a special honor for me today because I get to speak to some of my close friends and colleagues in the newspaper business. Journalism is as critical to democracy as any branch of government. At least that's the way it's always been said. We're trying to inform our readers, keep an eye on elected officials, tell the good news, the bad news across so many different segments of our community. And primarily what we want to do today is hear from you and talk about why people need newspapers. What's their use for them? Is it just to be informed? Is it to stay connected to the community? Even help make important decisions? Now, obviously, times have changed quite a bit in our business. The internet and social media have turned things upside down. Silicon Valley giants like Amazon, Google, Facebook are pulling ad dollars. They're pulling readers away, even with our own content posted there. So we've had to adapt our business models quite a bit, but still the future is uncertain. Thankfully, we have some smart people who we can count on, including many who are in this room today. Our partner at the paper, Brian Boyhan, is here. He's been the heart and soul of the Express for 30 years and is really a tremendous mind when it comes to this stuff. Peter Booty is here, our news editor at the paper, who's run his fair share of newspapers over his career. Christine Sampson, Terry McShane, Michael Heller, Ellen Diaguardi, that's part of our team at the Express, Annette Hinkle, they're all here today. My father-in-law, Jack Graves, is here from the East Hampton Star, where he has worked, are you ready for this, for 50 years at the East Hampton Star. He's definitely somebody to talk to. Darrell and Chris are here from the East Hampton Star. Bridget Leroy is here from the Independent. And of course our panelists, who I'd like to introduce. We have Jim Rutenberg, who's a media columnist and writer-at-large for the New York Times and the New York Times Magazine. Michelle Ray, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the New York Press Association, an organization that's of critical importance to all of us. Andrew Olsen is the publisher of the Times Review Media Group, which includes the Suffolk Times, the Shelter Island Reporter, and the Riverhead News Review. Vera, who's a reporter with Newsday and used to work in the community news business. Joseph Shaw, who's the executive editor of the Press News Group, which includes the Southampton Press and the East Hampton Press. And last but not least, my lovely wife and partner and editor and co-publisher of The Express, Kathryn G. Manu. Welcome, everyone. So as a means of introducing the panel a little further and kind of setting the stage for our discussion, I'm going to ask each a question, and then I'll turn the conversation over to Brian, and we'll look for some questions and comments from all of you. Jim, if we could start with you. In a recent New York Times column titled "The Effects Cannot Be Overstated When Tech Invaded Media," you wrote, "The giant sucking sound you hear is Silicon Valley vacuuming the digital ad dollars out of the news business, badly hurting small and mid-sized newspapers across the country. This is now a given, but I'll say it again anyway. As newspapers fall, leaving important local issues uncovered, the social media companies contributing to their deaths are helping to fill the content void with unverified and, at worst, patently false information. Solutions are not coming fast, though smart people are working on it." So my question, Jim, is who are these smart people? And what are some of the solutions you think they might come up with?
Well, maybe I shouldn't have said, can you hear me? Maybe I shouldn't have said smart necessarily. No. Because I think it's more, a lot of the people who are working on it who have the power to do something are more worried about their own public relations than, I think, real solutions. But this week alone, Facebook announced it's going to donate $3 million to the actual real smart people who are working, I should say, to do it on the sort of nonprofit level. So you have groups like Report for America, which is some former reporters with now money from Facebook, who are going to finance reporters who, kind of young reporters who are starting early in their careers to go work at different newspapers, which means going to maybe a paper like yours and saying, do you want a deep dive environmental reporter? Or they'll go somewhere where there is no paper and have a reporter do a project on education where it's a real news desert out there in the middle of the country. Craig Newmark, who invented Craigslist, who is almost single-handedly responsible for the death of classified ads in newspapers, which was a very big deal. He's given tens of millions of dollars to help prop up local journalism. So we're seeing a lot of these projects, but when Google's doing a lot of this, but when it comes to Google and Facebook, it's like they're giving you some spackle to patch up your wall while they're taking out your foundation.
Thank you. Michelle, with 40 years of experience in the newspaper business, and now with 27 years leading the New York Press Association, you've seen the evolution of local journalism over several decades. Many media companies are expanding their roles in the community in an effort to remain relevant during a time of great change. There is a new study for which you are the chairwoman on national newspaper relevance, which is working to redefine and defend the collective impact of community news on a national scale. Can you explain some of the primary goals of this project? And do you think you'll be surprised, either in a positive or negative way, with the results?
I can, but first I want to take a nod to you, because in terms of relevance, events like this totally reinforce the relevance of a community newspaper to its citizens. So I really want a great nod of appreciation to you for doing this. So in terms of a little background for the rest of you, the New York Press Association represents 721 newspapers throughout the state of New York. More than 200 of them are on Long Island. We have 122 non-English newspapers. We represent Catholic newspapers, Jewish newspapers, business newspapers, alternative newspapers. The New York Press Association is one of 42 state press associations in the United States, and there are also 6 similar entities in Canada, representing each province there separately. So together, the newspaper associations are watching the disruption of the industry that we are entrusted to sustain. We're very concerned about that. We're also watching the digital disruption that's impacting our associations and our ability to sustain our newspapers. So we decided that we needed an outsider, somebody who didn't care whether the industry survived or not, to take a really close look at newspapers and the associations that are charged with sustaining them. So we hired a woman by the name of Andy Cunningham, who's a Silicon Valley entrepreneur. She started her career with Steve Jobs. She was part of the team that initially launched the first Mac. She then went to work for BlackBerry and was responsible for their turnaround. If you'll notice, or if you do not know, BlackBerry no longer does these devices. It's actually the largest software manufacturer in the world. And she engineered that turnaround. She worked for Motorola, she worked for Avaya, she worked for the Aspen Institute. She's done a lot of turnarounds. So I contacted her and said, can you help me turn around the newspaper industry? And she said, of course. So we embarked on a relevance project. We really wanted to see if newspapers were as irrelevant as social media and some citizens seem to think they are. We wanted to see if the associations were losing their relevance. And so she began examining ad agencies, clients, people that were not ever clients, readers, people that were not ever readers. And we've come up with some proposals, solutions, recommendations that will all go back to our board. We hope to announce the initial results of the survey in April. But one of the coolest things that they did come to the conclusion of is that community newspapers were always the glue that held the communities together. Where there were solid communities, there were good newspapers supporting them. And that when those communities lost their papers, in many ways, the government ran amok when there was nobody watching or talking about what was going on. So they think that it's clear, more clear than ever, that community newspapers need to survive. We need to find a new way to do that. We need to find new revenue streams. We need to adopt new business models. We've come up with a couple. Some of them are way out there, but some of them I think we'll be able to do. But the first thing we're going to do is actually use our collective power. We represent more than 10,000 newspapers throughout the United States and Canada. We're working on a message architecture which will tell citizens why you need to support community journalism, why you need newspapers more than ever. And if we say that consistently on multiple platforms over and over and over again, maybe they'll listen to us as much as they listen to social media.
Thank you. Andrew, like most local media companies on the East End, Times Review is a family-owned and operated company. But you're also moving ahead with an impressive array of products faster than most small media companies in New York State. In addition to the 3 newspapers, you have a series of magazines, websites, and digital products that include TV quality video production. At the same time, perhaps your biggest accomplishment in recent years was the in-depth reporting that helped solve a decades-old murder mystery. Does the future of media, in your opinion, circle around lifestyle or hard-hitting news coverage, print or digital? If it's both, and I'm very interested to hear your answer, how do you intend to pay for it all?
It's definitely both. First of all, Gavin, thank you so much for having us all here today. This is great, and thank everybody here for coming. We have really focused on brand building. Our oldest paper, the Suffolk Times, has been around for 162 years, and it's very hard to sort of stay true to what got us here, and at the same time adapt to all the new things that are happening. So we've really focused on bringing talent into the company and building from within the staff, training people, having them be really, really passionate about what we're doing. And I think for us, the biggest, somebody asked me a long time ago about the technology change that was happening, and they said, are you excited about it? And I said, that's actually a really good question, because when you're a print publisher, sometimes you're not that excited about it. And when you kind of flip it, which we did, and actually Vera's husband, Grant, has sort of run our innovation team, and we've done a lot of different projects that have been, I think, a little bit crazy at times, but very innovative. And we've really tried to cross-pollinate from within the staff. I believe in sort of running the company with an integrated sort of management style where if you think about a floor plan in a house and you have all these different rooms, I want an open floor plan so that the editorial team knows what's happening from a sales standpoint, and the sales team knows what's happening with the art department and production. And we've really, when you think about the print process or the print business, so much of our business was there was a manual workflow in place. So we've done a number of things over the years. I mean, we process hundreds of ads and classified ads each week, thankfully. And we use technology solutions to be able to digitize that workflow. And by doing that, we were able to then divert resources that were being allocated to the production side to being really creative and come up with new ideas. Like we launched something called northforker.com, which is a leisure lifestyle website, food, wine, real estate, events, things like that are happening. That was really a move where we had all these niche publications, niche magazines, and we rolled them up into the digital space. And then we said, you know what? That's doing so well. Let's actually reverse it. So then we created North Forker magazine. And so it's been fun to sort of work back and forth with those, with the brands, and with some of the talent that's again within the company. Steve Wick joined our staff, Ambrose Clancy, who's the editor of the Shelter Island Reporter, and Joe Workmeister, who's the editor of the Suffolk Times News Review. They're doing really, really incredible work, and we're using video to kind of tell stories. We have a series called The Work We Do, which is all about just regular working people that get up every morning and do their jobs. And people love that content. And that's a multimedia piece of content where it's video, and then it's also pushed out through our different social media channels like Instagram in different formats, and also in print, and it's sponsored by Peconic Landing. So, those are some of the things that we're doing to, again, be able to navigate through all the change that's happening.
I'm exhausted already, Andrew.
Sorry, I talked too much.
Vera, as a reporter for the largest media company in Suffolk County, and as someone who started out, as I mentioned, at community weeklies, and you transitioned into the role of editor at the North Forker, which Andrew was just mentioning, what sort of content have you found is capturing the attention of readers, both online and in print?
So as somebody who's worked in news and lifestyle, I kind of have a unique perspective on that. But ultimately what people want is they want to learn something, and that's what they're coming to us for. They want to learn something about their community. They want to see stories about people that they know, and they want to learn things that impact their daily life, and that's why stories about parking, about traffic, are always going to hit really well. Things that are going to change your day. If somebody has a proposal to build a big tower in your neighborhood, and that's something that you're going to have to look at every day. Those are things that people want to know. And then, the industry might be changing, but the role that newspapers play and what people come to us for, not as much. And then there's always just the categories that are going to hit really well. Police stories are always going to be your most read story of the day. Surprisingly, food stories do really well, and that's true of the daily papers and the community papers. And weather stories do really well. So that's what people come to us for.
All right, thank you. Joe, you've called yourself an evangelist for community journalism, and I know that because I've sat with you a lot of times talking. And you believe that well-produced, smart, and reliable community news is the future of the media industry. In what ways do you believe community news groups like the Press or the Times Review or the Express work differently than larger regional or national media companies?
Yeah, I'm working on an evangelist character, actually, that I'm going to tour with, and I'm going to get the cadence down. But I am a community journalism evangelist, and it's because I do believe that a lot of the struggles that we've seen in the industry, in media in general, have been with larger organizations. I think that's filtering down now much more to our level, and we're all feeling it. But I do believe that people care much more about what happens in their backyards now than ever before. And that's what we have to rise up and deliver. And I think the thing that we have, it's kind of ironic because I think it's similar to the battle that every business owner has. If you are a brick and mortar shop owner, you're battling with Amazon. If you're a bookstore, you're battling, but the bookstores actually present kind of an instructional vision. There was a time not long ago when everybody thought independent small bookstores were going to just be gone because Barnes & Noble and Amazon were going to kill them. Well, actually the most recent reports show that there's more and more independent bookstores that are surviving and thriving, and it's because they do something nobody else does. It's that delivery of what you need locally and that local touch. And I think that's what we have compared to bigger media organizations as well. It'll work for us in the same way. The impetus is on us to raise our game, that we have to bring essential information to people. And I'll just take a moment to say that everybody in this room, I'm not sure people really understand how lucky the East End of Long Island is as far as local journalism and community journalism. The newspapers that we have out here and the websites, all of the publications, and I'm not naming just because I don't want to leave anybody out, because it's every single one of them, are among the best in the United States at what they do. And you have layers and layers of coverage of local government and things going on in the community out here that you simply don't have in comparable communities around the United States. And just this event is a great example of that. And it is the kind of outreach that local newspapers need to do going forward to survive. But you're getting it here with the Express. And I would just urge everybody here to think about the fact that everybody thinks their business is unique and completely valuable to a community. But I would argue that a newspaper, and I include websites and whether it's a daily, weekly, whatever, these are valuable institutions in a community that should be supported by readers, advertisers. It goes well beyond just the business side of things. You don't want to lose us, because the Times recently just did a piece about the economic impact when community papers go out. I think Jim sort of mentioned earlier, the fact that when a newspaper goes out, it can be devastating for communities. It has an economic impact as well, and your government doesn't have the watchdog anymore. So I'm an evangelist because it's important for everybody, not just for our industry.
Thank you. Ms. Manu,
Yes.
you started as a beat reporter covering Sag Harbor Village and worked your way up to becoming an editor and publisher. We also live here and grew up on the South Fork, meaning we know and are friendly with many elected officials. We face our readers and the subjects we cover on a daily basis. Is it challenging to balance important watchdog journalism while also remaining a part of a tight-knit community?
I mean, I guess the easy answer would be, of course, it feels challenging, but it's not really, because we have our mission and we have our job, and that's very clear. First off, I just want to say, I'm looking around this room. I see staff from the East Hampton Star here, from the Independent. Of course, we've got the Times Review and the press here. I've got amazing colleagues, and a lot of us have lived in the communities we cover for a really long time, and there are a lot of pros to that. Peter and I were just talking about this the other day. We have historic context as a result to the stories we're doing. When issues like affordable housing or parking or traffic come up, they have real relevance to us because we're living in that. So, there are a lot of pros to that. But, certainly is it awkward sometimes when you're walking down the street or at the Little League game and there's that person you've known since high school who you just had to do a story on that maybe was not flattering? Yeah, it's really awkward. But, we have our mission. And I think now more than ever, it's really important that community newspapers are operating with integrity and responsibility. And that's how we're going to really remain relevant. As Joe said, we've got to up our games. We've got to bring in-depth reporting to what we do so that we're really there for our communities as they're going through all of these massive changes. I mean, in Sag Harbor alone, it feels like a really big year, and it's on us to help guide the community forward as we deal with this evolution.
Okay, thank you. Yes,
jump in for a second?
yes,
Tell you that
absolutely.
Before this event, I spent the morning in the office of the town supervisor and the town attorney after writing an editorial this week attacking both of them for their positions on the Zoning Board of Appeals and its policy and the way it reviews cases, which I would argue is patently illegal. They disagree. But seeing them face to face is one of the things that I think that we do as local newspaper. We don't hide from people, and I think that's important at all levels of journalism. But I think it's also one of the things that local journalists we live here and we see people, and I think it makes us a little more careful about what we say. But it also makes us we have to be able to defend what we say when we see those people. I think it's important that way.
Yep, absolutely, and what's also important is feedback. We're not perfect. We do make mistakes, and we want to hear from people about what are we missing, what are we covering, what should we be covering, maybe what shouldn't we be covering, and that's a really important part of why we're here today. So I am going to turn the microphone over to Brian. He's going to have a couple things to say, and if you want to ask a question or have a few words, please speak into the microphone. Brian.
Thank you. Well, you are our future. Our future is in your hands, so no pressure here. There was a study I came across the other day by the Night Lab at Northwestern University, and it describes an audience just like you, people who are committed to the community, people who participate, are inquisitive, have curious minds, as the kind of an audience that we need to capture. So what you tell us today, and please don't be shy, what you tell us today, the questions you ask and the observations you make are very important to us. I'd also like you to think about things that are important to you in your life, in your daily life, the things that you worry about, the things that you are concerned about, the things that bring you joy. And of those things, are there things that we should be addressing more in our newspapers? That's important to us. So let's open this up. It's your opportunity now to ask questions, make observations, speak to the people who bring you the unfake news. Somebody has to have a question. We have one in the back here. And just give your name.
My name is Elizabeth Layton, and I have, as a freelance journalist, written some stories for Shelter Island Reporter and the East Hampton Press and Southampton Press. And I'm just going to make one observation. I'll sum it up with this ironic phrase: Shelter Island is another country. I like Shelter Island. I know a little bit about Shelter Island. I love Sag Harbor, but my question is, why can't I go to one place to find out about everything that's happening within 15 miles of my house in the Northwest Woods? Every paper seems to be an island.
Merger opportunities? Andrew?
Since I'm the publisher of the Shelter Island Reporter, I grew up in Southold, so I could see across the bay and I could see Shelter Island. And I grew up reading the Suffolk Times, which I absolutely loved. And the reason why I think there's such deep connections to each of the different brands that are represented here, whether it's the Sag Harbor Express or the East Hampton Star, any of the products or brands that are here, is because the content is so highly localized. I mean, we have a saying that we would not cover an earthquake that happened in East Hampton unless it broke your dishes in Mattatuck. So if you think about the content that way, it's a very the reason why it's news and information that you can't get anywhere else. Now, in the digital age, when I look at my kids, my kids can get access to, or all of us can get access to any little bit of information. I can tell you what the temperature is in Montreal in about 30 seconds or 10 seconds. So I think, when you start thinking about the content digitally, that's where there are opportunities to be able to, bring content together from different communities in a different way. I don't know if that helped or not, but.
Georgie?
I also think, while our newspapers are hyper-local, and I agree 100%, that's what makes them special, and it allows us to really dive deep into our communities. And if we were trying to cover too broad a coverage area in our newspapers, I think that would be really challenging. But we cover issues in East Hampton regionally that we know affect our readership. Same thing with Southampton. And then in terms of lifestyle, we developed our magazines, Express magazines, which actually serve both the North and South Fork as a way to kind of broaden our coverage area. I think we're also finding ways to work together. We started the East End News Project this year. That was an initiative between the Times Review Group and the Press News Group and the Sag Harbor Express, where we've been looking at the opioid crisis. And I think that we're going to probably start working together more on some of these broader regional issues because we see the value there, and I think our readers see the value there too.
Yeah, great.
Just add that it's good to have multiple viewpoints, though, as well. And I think that in Southampton and East Hampton towns in particular, you've got editorial pages of all different varieties commenting on local issues. And I think that diversity makes this community unusual, but it's also makes it very healthy. So I think that's a good thing, and it's something to celebrate.
And we try to encourage people to spend more money on newspapers. If you buy 2, 3 newspapers, it'd be great. Luke?
Thank you. I have a related question, actually, to the first one. As coming from the perspective of an avid consumer of news, I think everyone here would all agree we get bombarded by news every Thursday in our mailbox and now in our inboxes too. The rest of the week we're in a bit of a news void. I'm sure it's out there if you dig for it, but when something occurs, either police news, government news, sports, a weather event, whatever it might be, there's no real one place to a reliable source to go for that story, and it's certainly not coming on. We're certainly not seeing it on TV, cable or otherwise. We're not really seeing it from websites, either national or local, and we're not really getting it on the radio. Perhaps it's good that we're really fragmented, but as a consumer of news, I've always been surprised. Here we are 20 years after the dominance of the internet began, that there's no sort of one reliable source to go find, or even multiple reliable sources to find out real-time news as the week goes along. In a bigger metro area, I'm sure that exists, but here you're a bit of a void until the next Thursday comes along, and then you say, oh yeah, that's what happened when I saw those sirens that day, or that storm came, or whatever.
So maybe we could hear from some of the editorial side in response to that. The notion of how we handle breaking news in the digital age.
Yeah, I don't want to be argumentative, but one of the things we aspire to on a daily basis, I think, with all of our news organizations now, is to acknowledge the 24/7 aspect of news and to try and bring that to the local level. And so we do attempt to do that, I think, every week. I'll tell you that, just as an aside, I was having a conversation with the chief of police in Southampton town just yesterday, and this has been one of our main complaints as well, by the way, is that when police news breaks, the method of delivering that news to us to deliver it to you is about as antiquated. It's about 1990. And I was told in response that that's the way their system currently exists. It's a paper-based system, and they're working their way towards making that information available online so we can access it more quickly and more efficiently. But that just doesn't exist at the moment for us. So I'm as frustrated as you are as far as that goes. We really want to be much more current with our information, but I think it's something we strive to do. And Vera, working for a daily paper, might be the better person to answer some of this too. As far as, or maybe not.
Well, I mean, we've been responding to. We made the transition to being 24-hour news coverage over 10 years ago when you first rolled out 27 East, and and I would also disagree, and I do think that 27 East does a pretty good job, and I would understand if somebody said, well, there's a daily paper on Long Island, but I don't see East End stories in there every day. That might be a fair criticism, though.
I wouldn't mind putting in a vote for a slower news cycle. So I kind of love that, Maybe we can find a happy medium, a little slower news. We can write it better. We can think about it more. You can absorb it.
Interesting.
It's not going to happen, folks.
Another question.
My name's Marilyn Montgomery, and I'm a resident of Sag Harbor. When we first moved out here several years ago, how long, but I don't know. I read the Express from beginning to end, and a lot of it for me was what's going on in this town and what's happening this Friday or Saturday or something. And that made it easy for us to participate in what's going on. Since then, I've developed macular degeneration. You talk about the young people going to digital. I have to go to digital. I cannot read the newspaper anymore. And it's very important to me that what I can access is easy to read, easy to figure out, whether I'm reading about things that are going on in town or what's happening. And it's not a young person's thing. Everybody almost today is going to digital.
George, you want to comment on that?
Sorry about that. If there's ever any way that we can make that process easier for you, call my office, ask for Kathryn G. Manu. I'm happy to help in any way I can, because that's our main role, is to make sure that you are getting that service that you need and that you desire. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Okay. We have a question right here.
Hi, I'm Janice Delano from Bridgehampton. This is kind of a numbers question. I've just always been curious, now that so much is moving to digital, the big savings. Like I, for example, subscribe to the Southampton Press only digitally, and I've noticed that the price is the same whether you get a hard copy or I just do it digitally. I was wondering just roughly what percentage the variable cost, namely the paper printing and distribution, is of a paper as a percentage of the selling price, roughly. Just, is it like 20%, 30%, 50%? Because that's the cost advantage that the internet has over a print. And I hate to see print getting lost, and I'm just wondering what it costs.
Andrew?
So one of the things that I lay awake thinking about every night is the cost structure of our business. And the print cost structure is not a very attractive cost structure. It costs us more to print, truck, and mail a paper to you than we are getting in terms of the subscription price. Where it's made up is obviously the advertising dollars. The other thing that you have to think about is how expensive it is to create local content. So all of the people that are here, yes, we have freelance resources that we pull in, but it's primarily content that's created by people that are on staff that know the communities inside and out. One of the things that is another dynamic is obviously the digital content and whether or not people are paying for that digital content. So 27 East has been a paid access digital website for many, many years. We are about to do that with our news brands, where you'll get a certain number of clicks, kind of following the New York Times model, the Wall Street Journal model, the Washington Post. We've studied all these different sort of larger brands to see how they're doing it. And but that's something that's going to have to change. But from a print standpoint, you know, again, the economics are not terrific. Well, that's not going to help. I mean, yeah, it's really interacting with the content and being willing, if you're if you own a business, being willing to advertise to support obviously your business, but also you know, the newspapers and digital websites as well.
Michelle at the Press Association has for years been preaching we should stop giving away our content for free. Can you give us a little bit of a...
I'd love to, thank you. For generations, the business model at newspapers was 80% of the revenue came from advertising and 20% came from circulation. And over the last 10 or 12 years, those numbers have switched as digital has increasingly taken revenue away from our advertising departments, and as we created digital products that cost us money, we have the same amount of overhead when we write a story, regardless of what platform we use to distribute it. No other entity that manufactures, and that's what we do, we manufacture a new product either every day or every week, or now we're on a 24/7 news cycle where we manufacture constantly. No other manufacturer gives their product away. But what we do on news websites, we largely give our product away. And we can't afford to do that anymore. We simply can't afford to do that. We actually are working now. We need to take a really hard look, sort of like cable television did. We need to charge for airtime. We need to charge you to see stuff on our websites. We just can't afford to give it away anymore. It's just, it doesn't make any sense. We're businesses after all. We are a civic-oriented business. We mean a lot to you, you mean a lot to us, but that doesn't mean we're not a business. If we cease to have enough money to exist, we're not going to have reporters on the street. And we're also largely strapped in many communities with a lot of real estate that we no longer need and no longer can afford. We have legacy costs in terms of pensions, in terms of large buildings. The cost structure of our companies is really something that we're all taking a hard look at. We need a new business model, and we need one right away.
Jim?
And I would just add to that the one positive thing over the last 2 years is people are finally starting to understand this. For a long time they didn't. So subscriptions in a lot of places are up, not as many as we'd like to see. But I want to say one thing on the print side. This goes for the Times, but I assume it goes for everyone, is that the print advertising, even as it falls, it still has incredibly good margins. And that's why we see hedge funds swooping into local communities and buying print newspapers. They want to squeeze that money out of them and leave them as like shriveled grapes on the ground when they're done. And that's tragic. But what that does say is that there's still something to the print product. And at the Times, I know when we started our our current form of the digital transformation, the feeling from up at the top of the paper was they couldn't get rid of the print paper fast enough. That was the initial thinking. It's because of all these reasons. But now they realize that as long as we can maintain some print subscriber base, we need that money. That money is still, the overwhelming majority of our revenue comes from print ads. And the tragedy of the print product going away is that those margins will never return.
There was a question over here.
Hi, I'm Jackie Brody. My daughter is a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. And I know the standards for accuracy that are pressed on her. I mean, she cannot make any mistake at all that it wasn't reported. We're going into kind of a reporting that is not accurate, and I think that in a local paper, but any paper in print, it is into accuracy, and we're into kind of a world where people don't defend or even support what they do is true.
We've entered into this kind of like truthiness period. Joe?
And I think that's true, and I think it's something that sets our publications apart, though. Yes. And we have to carry the challenge for us, and I can tell you that I've always said that I've been fortunate, air quotes, enough to be a journalist in the time that's had the most upheaval for our industry since Gutenberg. I mean, we're only 20 years out from the internet, and we're still trying to figure out how that works. And it'll probably be another 20 years till we really figure it out. But one of the things that we have, and that I think we maintain, and I say we meaning everybody in the room, the community journalists that I'm talking about, we have that dedication to the print journalism standards that have always existed, translating that to our digital products and resisting the temptation to put things up before we know for sure what the truth is one of the real challenges that we have. But I think we're meeting those challenges, and I can tell you that we believe really strongly, and I think I speak for everybody when I say this, that we will wait a little longer to report something to make sure what we're reporting is accurate. But we also acknowledge that in this day and age, that's not what news consumers tend to want. They want, tell me what's going on. I don't care if you change it later. Just tell me what the situation is now. We tend to lean more towards the print journalism way of doing things, which is to make sure we know what we're talking about before we say it out loud. But that is a challenge. But I think that's one of the things we do have over the big media organizations. I think, and I'm certainly not including the New York Times in that group. They certainly have that as well. But I think when you look at internet sources, for instance, they're all about speed. They're not about accuracy. We are about accuracy with as much speed as we can generate, which can be difficult. And that may go back to the earlier question. We are challenged. We don't have enormous staffs. We aren't CNN, but we are sort of 24/7. But we don't have a CNN-sized staff to do that. So there can be a little lag on some stories. And sometimes that's trying to get it right. And sometimes it's just the challenge of the resources that we have.
I think
Thanks.
the other piece to that equation is that it's incumbent upon the press associations throughout the United States and Canada to equip the local newspapers with tools to educate citizens about what is news and what isn't news, and what was the source of this news, where did this come from. The newspapers have been largely absent in that conversation, and we really need to give them the tools to educate citizens about where the news came from. The source is extremely important.
Thanks. Bridget?
Hi, I'm Bridget Leroy. I couldn't not speak up because I care so much about so many people in this room. A couple of things that have come up since I first flagged Brian. First of all, just to say The Independent is free. We've been free for 26 years. Our website is completely free, and the news is free. And I don't know how long we can sustain that, but that's due entirely to advertising. So we're lucky that we've been able to sustain that. And if Joe's the evangelist, then I've got to be the cheerleader, because we are so lucky in this community to have so many incredible sources of news, and that we all kind of, even though we're competitive, we all support each other. I was sick last week. Annette Hinkle went forward and reviewed a show for me because I was too sick to go. Do you know what I mean? That's the kind of stuff that I don't think happens in other communities. And I know that Joe and I have talked often about stuff. And are you running that this week? Because I'll back off if it's your story, and with Georgie. I mean everything. So I really appreciate. I can't explain enough if you don't know how much the media supports each other out here, and that is just such a rare bird. Having said that, this thing about what is opinion / commentary and what is news, and the speed of getting it out. And is anyone here from the East End Beacon? Because they publish once a month, and I think that's awesome. It's really there. You can get it as quickly as you want or as slowly as you want. But I guess the question I really wanted to posit is, does anyone else have a problem with your readers, sorry, and I think this kind of comes around to like so much TV journalism is commentary, and like everything that Sidney Lumet, and Patty Chesky did in Network has kind of come to pass. The crazier it is, the more people want to see it. Do you have problems with your readers being able to differentiate between what is editorial and what is news? Because we have that problem at The Independent, where people will really, like, someone will write a column, which is their opinion. It says opinion at the top, and we'll get, you know, a lot of pushback because people think that's a news story. So if any of you, you know, and that goes to what, you know, Michelle was just saying about teaching kids what is news and what isn't. So I just want to know if any of you have that issue.
I mean, I think it definitely has come up. I think probably it's come up at every single newspaper, and it's just that basic lack of information of what is on the op-ed page is opinion, and you know what is in your news hole, that's your hard news, and that's where your reliable non-opinion or non-biased information is located. I have to say we haven't had too much of that, but I mean I'm sure that it's a pretty common problem.
I've had people refer to advertisements as news stories. So it does happen. It does. I've always. I guess how do we educate? Yeah, you know, I think that should start in high school. You know, I think college kids should be required to take some sort of news literacy course because it is a problem. Absolutely.
Can I jump in on that? Stony Brook University has a news literacy program, and it teaches college students exactly these kinds of things and teaches you to be a better news consumer. And they are just now expanding that program down into the high schools and the middle schools. And I'm hoping, I think they have a couple of school districts on Long Island that are going to be part of the pilot program for that. And Hampton Bays is going to be one of them because I connected them up because I know that they have a very active newspaper at Hampton Bays. And but I think those are lessons that need to be taught early because kids learn media now through their cell phones, and so they don't really get the discernment at a time when we grew up and all you had was newspapers, TV, and radio, and that was easy to distinguish for the most part. The layers and layers of opinion and news and opinion news and news opinion is so complicated now that we need to teach the consumers to be more discerning, I think. And I think Stony Brook's doing a great job of that.
Thanks, Joe. We have a question over here.
Probably take that one
In
too.
answer,
'Cause
Robert
sorry.
McCartney, resident here also. In answer to your question of
I'll make it fast, but my newspaper's at the center of this debate almost weekly. And to be fair, too, to the readers, it can be confusing, right? It's something that drives me personally crazy, but Twitter gives reporters an outlet now to spout off in ways that they don't and shouldn't in their stories. So that's an issue. I'm, opposed to that. But I've talked to fellow reporters who say the problem with Twitter in a way is, there are conversations reporters have in room 9 of City Hall or in Town Hall, like, get a load of the mayor today. Right. And there's a bit of that that's now taking place in national discussion, and that makes it confusing to the reader. And what the studies are showing is younger readers want to see more personality in the writing. So there's a thing going on in publishing now where, at the national papers at least, where they want to encourage the younger generation to show a little more sass, but there's a line there. So the line is shifting. It should never shift beyond facts and the truth compared to opinion, and it should be more carefully delineated. But it's a tricky time right now, and it's being navigated, and the reader can be forgiven sometimes for being confused.
Yes, in regards to the question over the cost of verifying something from comment into fact, I would point out that probably artificial intelligence, it's not there yet, but artificial intelligence is going to provide you with the ability to almost instantaneously verify something as to whether it's fact and how many facts you can compile to support it.
Anybody want to comment on AI and where that's...
I would be a little nervous to trust that source. I mean, because what if that AI is, infiltrated? I mean, we're definitely not there yet. But, again, with, cyber attacks and everything, I'd like to have my boots on the ground, reporters I trust figuring out if that's fact or not, more than a computer, I think.
And also, a lot of our problems right now are AI-driven because the algorithm of Facebook serves up what's most popular as opposed to what's most true.
We have one comment here.
That said, though, artificial intelligence, people are experimenting with that. We deploy a lot of resources to meeting coverage, and our staffs think that meeting coverage is way more important than a lot of our readers think meeting coverage is. So a lot of newspapers across the country are experimenting with using AI to cover meetings, saving reporters from going out and covering meetings when it's pretty mundane stuff that can be translated when you get back to the office. So.
Idea, can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jeff Bragman. I'm an environmental lawyer and also a member of the Town Board of East Hampton. And I just wanted to acknowledge the local newspapers for their fundamental importance in the way our democracy works, because I appear in front of boards on many occasions and occasionally saying things that aren't welcome to be heard. And in those instances, there are times when the only way to get that message out with the kind of rationality and moral authority that's required is to rely on the local papers. And I've noticed a switch in a lot of the local papers over the last 20 years, moving away from just chronicling meetings that may be deemed to be unimportant to really being news organizations. And coupled with that is, I think, a new, stronger stance in the editorials to take positions on these big issues that are driving the town. And there's nothing that can substitute for that. It is so vital to democracy, and there's no artificial intelligence that can take the place of just a rational reporter asking hard-hitting questions and an editorial staff with the moral authority and the courage to really speak out on issues. So I think I love what I'm seeing in the local papers. I want to see more of it. I get them for free at the town hall, but I buy them on the street to encourage you guys. So I just wanted to congratulate you and wish you to keep stronger and speaking out more as the time goes on. It's very, very important and helpful.
Thank you, Jeff.
Can I say
Jim?
one thing on that point and the point of covering meetings? There was a pretty cool moment in Montauk last week where, and I'm sure several reporters here were in the middle of it. Christopher Walsh certainly was at the Star, where there was a meeting at the firehouse in Montauk about the Hamlet plan, right? It was the Hamlet plan, and things that the town wanted to do that the board needed to decide. And some members of the community said, we don't know about this. No one's told us about this. And the newspapers could say, we've been covering this for years. So there's also something to be said for the good meeting coverage and the people who still aren't reading papers that need to be. And that was a teachable moment.
Yeah, we have a question right here.
My name is Sinjin Bannon, and I have two questions, if I might. Do any of you really feel that fake news is a problem for hyper-local news? I mean, is it really a big problem? No.
Not on the East End.
No, I didn't think so. In all of this conversation, we really haven't addressed what I think is probably the killer, which is you're losing subscribers. Between 18 and 35, they're drifting off. They're getting their news from Alexa in the morning, okay, or their Twitter, or God knows where. But, when you lose a subscriber, God bless them, and they leave you or they die, most people seem to be losing them. The roles are not growing. But in none of this conversation that any of you address any strategy on how you are going to get back the future of your newspapers, because eventually age is going to take care of you. You're all going to disappear here, So what are your strategies in place to attract and deliver the news the way, my son might want it?
Okay, so there's a few things there. First off, anecdotally, I have a little sister who is a millennial. She lives in San Francisco. She went to Berkeley. She and her friends are reading newspapers, not on their phones. They're reading hardcore newspapers. They're reading print. They like print. But anyway, I think, we are losing subscribers. I think most of us probably have. I think the big thing is what Michelle was talking about in terms of giving our products away. This is a generation that is used to consuming everything for free. And, as an industry, we have to say that, we can't support that anymore. The Sag Harbor Express, sagharborexpress.com has been free for always. That is going to change this year with a membership model. We're going to be looking to bring subscribers in where they will have early access to events and, to the special gatherings like this today. I think that that's one model. I think you also have to diversify your business to do something that Michelle and the New York Press Association talked about a lot, which was Community 360. It's really incumbent on newspapers to look at every facet of their community and make sure that they're producing some sort of content for everybody so that everybody feels like they're a part of this community that you're presenting in a daily format on your website and a weekly format in your newspaper. That's one way to do it.
If I can add, one of the things I always say is that I think our print circulation has certainly declined in the 20 years that since I followed Peter Booty to the Southampton Press. But it's important to note that and I think this is true again of every one of the news organizations here, our penetration into the community is exponential compared to the way it was 20 years ago. People know what is in our publications all the time. They read all the time. It is part of people's lives, and I think that is why we will stay relevant and why the future is solid for us. The trick is going to be two things: figuring out how to pay for it with a new digital world, with advertising rates and advertisers who are willing to go online and pay a reasonable rate for that. And also, we just have to tell people that you need to support your local newspaper to keep it. And we do need to start getting people to buy subscriptions. I think the big challenge early on was getting over that hump of free information on the internet. And I think we're still figuring it out. All of us are still figuring it out, all the way down to the New York Times. We're all figuring out how to do this going forward. But I think what we do as community journalists is so vital that I think we'll figure it out. And I think that that's the trick. We need help from everybody here, but we can figure it out.
And just two comments on that. While it's true that print newspapers circulation has declined dramatically in the past decade, the total audience delivered by our news organizations has never been larger. And so we frankly don't care what platform you read it on. We just want you to know that we are your source, and we want you to come to us. And the second part of the equation is that I would argue that until people become homeowners, parents, taxpayers, they're unlikely to care as much about the content in a community newspaper. Once you have children in an educational system, once you wonder where your tax dollars are going when you get that tax bill every year, you're much more likely to seek out a community newspaper and make it a permanent part of your life. And I think that's why millennials aren't that interested. They're delaying marriage, they're delaying families. And so we're not only seeing a transition in our industry, we're seeing a transition in the way people live their lives.
Well, just to add on to that, at Andrew's company, Times Review, I think they've, I used to work there, there has been a big effort to get millennial readers, and that was through lifestyle content. And I think there's the thought that, yeah, maybe they don't care so much about taxes or zoning laws now, but they'll have the brand recognition, so when they are homeowners, and they will convert to that. And I also just wanted to say that Newsday does have an Alexa briefing every morning, if anybody was interested.
And we're doing the same thing. So we have a Snapchat feed, we do Facebook Live, and our millennial readership is up, and our subscriptions are like 100% over where they were 2 years ago. I mean, it would help if Peter Von Squik would, and your other supervisors would beat you up every week. It might help your subscriptions. But there is something to just changing the way you present news for younger viewers, and I really think things are coming along everywhere on that score, and they're going to continue to. And a lot of the programs I talked about up front, the money that is going toward developing, helping local news is going toward digital products and that are aimed at younger readers.
The election of our president notwithstanding has, aside from that helping subscriptions at the Times, do you find that your younger readers, those that are, getting these briefings in the morning, are transitioning to become regular Times readers?
They believe they are. So, for instance, we have this podcast called The Daily, which is read 4 times more than the print paper ever was. it's a younger listenership, and yeah, some of them are buying subscriptions. That's why this isn't just about who's president right now. It's a different way of telling the news, and that podcast features reporters coming on talking about their stories in a more personal way. That's what younger viewers want. That's what I was kind of getting at before. And so those things are working. We're going to start a TV show. Obviously, that's hard to do on a hyper-local level, but there are versions of this, but it takes resources, but it sounds like everybody's working on it.
Andrew, I'm just going to co-opt this for a second, but you brought up the TV thing. Andrew, I know they've actually started producing TV. What success have you had with that, and do you have a sense about what audience is actually tuning in?
So last year we produced over 300 different pieces of video content, and we've really learned a lot through that process. This past fall we launched something called North Forker TV, which is basically longer form storytelling. With our magazine, we did a working waterfront publication in September, people that make their living on the water. And then we extended that into video. So we had Ian Crowley, who's a dock builder, and we followed Bronze into the city to the Fulton Fish Market as they're purchasing fish. We interviewed the guys at Wooden Boat Works and talked to them about how they approach restoring a historic sailboat, that sort of thing. Chris Hamilton, who's a commercial fisherman and a photographer, and so he narrated a video with photos that he took. We've also really dove into the podcast space. So right now we are producing podcasts both from a news standpoint and also from a lifestyle standpoint. So it's really just, you can monitor everything. I mean, you can see the metrics and you see what pieces of content are engaging and that people like, and you see other things that may be great, journalism, but they're not as relevant for some reason.
So this is a learning process, really.
It's all, every single day, our team they're focused on telling great stories and figuring out all the different platforms and formats that you can use. I mean, one of the pieces of learning from North Forker TV is we really feel like some of that content is longer than some people want. So actually doing it in a more condensed format, may be more appealing.
Thanks. Bob, I know you had a question.
I don't remember what the question was, but I think I would be remiss in not saying that, however you might want to describe Sag Harbor, whatever attributes you want to give it, I think that the Express is the perfect sort of partner articulation, embodies everything that I, at least personally, love about Sag Harbor, and kudos to you guys who are doing it. I can't imagine, Sag Harbor without it. In the same way I couldn't imagine the Sag Harbor without the cinema. I feel the Express is also the heart and soul of Sag Harbor, so thank you guys.
Questions, comments? Yes, Luke?
Sorry to hog the mic. One more question, sort of a follow-up on the one about news versus opinion. This one's about local publications trying to sort of wade more into national issues and national opinion. As we all know, the way people consume sort of national political news has really drifted in the wrong way. People are going toward sources that agree with their own views, whether it be newspapers, cable, the internet, and it's just an echo chamber. And I think it's been a negative for our political discourse. When people subscribe to a local newspaper, it's kind of refreshing. They're subscribing not because they necessarily agree with the political view, but they're subscribing because they have, like the gentleman before me just said, an affinity to the community, and that's their way of finding out news source. How do you think about, as you report on and editorialize on more national news, how do you think about how to do that without potentially offending or disagreeing with half of your readers who really are just there for sports scores and zoning issues and things like that? I mean, it must be a sensitive issue. I'm just curious.
Joe?
I have the mic. I don't think we think about it in those terms because and it's interesting because we did just have a conversation this week in our office about whether or not we should be talking, for instance, with our U.S. Representative Lee Zeldin more frequently about his positions on some of the things that are happening at the national level. We don't generally do that on a continual basis, but we do jump in from time to time whenever it's important issues and we think it localizes it. But the consideration is never on the news side. We never worry about offending readers because I think it's about letting the news happen and finding what the news actually is. And so if we were to talk to Lee Zeldin for a news story, that would be pretty straightforward, just trying to get an answer to his position on things. If we were to editorialize about that, then that's a different thing, and we may do that. And by the way, one of the earlier questions was about people confusing opinion for news. One of my favorite phrases, which I hear at least once or twice a year, is that editorial was biased. Which it was. That is what it was, yes. But anyway, but I digress. But I do think, I think that's part of the challenge for us, though, too, is when so much of the public discourse is about national issues, and I don't think we've ever seen a time where it's been quite like it is right now, I think we would be remiss to not at least attempt to localize those conversations when we can. And I think we try to do that. It can be difficult, and it's risky. There's no question it is risky. But I think we strive to try and find what that local impact is when we can.
Anybody else in the comment? Yes, of course.
Hi, my name's Annette Hinkle, and I think I've worked for pretty much everybody at that table. And except for the New York Times, I can give you my card later if you'd like. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the comment sections of your websites, because we have debated that for years. And I love how the New York Times does their comment sections. It seems like they're really, really cultivated and managed and massaged, and that they get the ones that really don't devolve into insulting arguments. And I just wondered if you all could talk comments.
Georgie?
Okay. So on our website, you actually have to, and this is not obviously foolproof because people can create fake accounts, but you do have to sign in through a login system or through a Facebook page. I think it's Google or Facebook. Gavin can Facebook. So you have to, the idea was that your name has to be on it, because one thing that bothered me is on our letters section, we require people to put their names on their letters. We will not print a letter if your name isn't on it, if we can't verify who you are. So why aren't we demanding the same thing of our websites? So that's something that we implemented. It's not a perfect system, but I do like the fact that at least you'd have to, put some real homework in to be sneaky to put a comment under a fake name. Because the comments do divulge on some websites that shall remain nameless into some, unpleasant, unproductive conversations.
Newsday, actually, we took down our comment section about a year ago while they're working to create some sort of new system. I don't have any updates for you as to that, but you still see a lot of those comments on Facebook, which media organizations have way less control over the conversation on Facebook. But so if you wanted to say it, you'd have to go there.
Did Newsday take the comments section down specifically for that reason, because it was being abused?
I'd have to refer you to the
Oh,
statement
sure.
on our website.
You've gone over to the dark side, haven't you?
It's a yes. I realize it's ridiculous because I've mentioned 3 meetings, but I swear to God I've had all 3 of those meetings in the last 2 days. And one of them was we're going to be reintroducing a new website this year, and comments are going to stay, except that they're now going to be in a box where you have to click to read them, which made me chuckle because I'm going to tell you that I'll just be the one that's, this is purely my own opinion. I get this question more frequently than any other question, and I think the comments sections are great. And I'll tell you why. We monitor ours, and we will take down comments that go overboard, which I don't think Newsday could possibly do, just because of the number. We're able to do that. And I do think it's a different level of discourse, to put it bluntly. But I think it's like the difference between a conversation in a bar and a conversation at a public meeting. I think a letter to the editor is like a conversation at a public meeting. The comment section is like a conversation at a bar. It doesn't have quite the level of importance or value necessarily, but it's not without value. I think there are times where those comment sections become exchanges of ideas in a positive way. A lot more of them don't. I get that. I'm not crazy. I see it too. But I do think sometimes those things are self-policing. And I think, I think they're with us, and I don't think they're going to go away. I hate the idea, for instance, that Newsday shut down the comments section just because it feels like a place for people to talk and exchange ideas, and that's ugly, and it can be because the public square is, but that is the public square, and I think it's important to have that. So.
Just give you an example of a story where I wish we still had public comments. In Lindenhurst, there was a homeowner who had to get a zoning variance for his treehouse, and that's an example of a story where I would love to see the comments on it. But
And I would say for my ego, we are pretty aggressive in terms of our moderation of the comments. So my competitors at the Post, when they have like 3,000 comments and I have 80, I get kind of bummed out because it feels like I'm less right. But yeah, but I think what we do, the reason we are so aggressive about it is because even the letters in our letter section have to be fact checked. They need to be, they have to have some sense of decorum. So I think we don't want to host misinformation even in our comments, but even that's hard. And I think they developed like an AI program and whatever, but I would take it no holds barred because it's just for my own numbers and ego. Kidding.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Nancy Greenberg. Probably to you and also you from the more national scale, it seems like there are more reportings and news stories where a source that was close to but cannot be disclosed. I mean, it's like every other person's a deep throat. And I know that we're in a very litigious time, and our society has gotten that way. But when you read local papers, I mean, thank God I don't think we've gotten to that point yet, and you do know your neighbors, so it's harder to hide. But I sometimes feel that takes the validity away from the heart of the matter and the truth behind it.
And we feel the same way. So there are these times when the paper will go, there will be a declaration from the bosses, and let's minimize anonymous sourcing. As I'm the media columnist of the paper, which by the way means I can be a little opinionated in my columns, but I'm big on anonymity only when it's absolutely necessary. So I don't do blind quotes, anonymous quotes. I just don't do them. Sometimes though, I did some investigative work last year on President Trump and Michael Cohen and the campaign finance scandal, and you're just not going to get the information without anonymous sources. So you're stuck. And so especially this White House is super leaky. But they're all anonymous. And the way that our reporters have tried to deal with that is 16 anonymous sources you see these numbers. I hate that as a writer because I don't like it, but that's why they're doing that, to make sure we realize this is an issue. It's all anonymous, but we're talking like 20 people are saying the same thing. They're in high levels of government. But we printed a editorial people may have heard of here from an anonymous White House official who said that just between us, no, I don't. And there was a debate within the newsroom, and there was not unanimous feeling that was what should have happened. So these debates are ongoing, and like internally, it comes and it goes. The reins get loosened, then they get tightened, and it's a constant. But I read old copies of the paper from the 70s, and it was actually way worse. Interestingly, yeah, we don't realize that. So, but they hadn't had Jason Blair bad things happen, a Jason Blair scandal. And that's when we had our biggest discussion of no more anonymity, but it's hard.
This is a question actually for Michelle and Jim. You mentioned earlier about big corporations coming in and taking over groups of newspapers and eviscerating them. do you see, both on a national level, areas where there is no public outcry for good quality news? In other words, looking down the future, you have a newspaper that's been eviscerated, and the product is just a shadow of what it once was. At some point, that becomes less and less valuable. Do you see areas where there is no public outcry because people don't care?
No, I see exactly the opposite thing. We identified news deserts throughout the country. Somebody on this panel, I think maybe it was Joe, referred to a news story a couple months ago where the local paper went out and the town board authorized the issuance of bonds at a rate that was ridiculous, and it ended up costing the community hundreds of thousands of dollars that the taxpayers didn't know was going on because there was nobody to report on that story. So more often we see people feeling like communities have been robbed of their community newspapers. We see people crying for people to come and open a newspaper. We see people on a shoestring opening online newspapers or doing anything they can to try to provide bona fide news coverage in those communities.
And I would say, aside from the news deserts, one counterintuitive thing that we've noticed is, however, that in the mid-sized cities where the dailies are really dying and in some cases going away, there's oddly not as much outcry, right? And I don't know why that is. Maybe people are busy, maybe they have local news on TV that satisfies them, or they'll wake up one day with a City Hall scandal that they were late to find out about, and then there will be some sort of outcry. But the mid-sized cities are losing their quality news at a rapid rate, and that's kind of gets less attention sometimes than, there's no great newspaper in the middle of Mississippi or what, And by the way, there may be, so I was just throwing that out. But so that's interestingly, sometimes it's right under the noses of places that should have more media kind of savviness.
Mm-hmm. Questions? Observations? Yes, Peter.
I have a question for Jim. I hope I'm not breaking protocol or doing the picking on you because you're the New York Times guy. But I wonder about a piece that I read in the Times maybe 2 years ago that I think was on page 2 of the first section about cutting back the editing staff. Major changes in how the copy editing system worked. And just before I ask you the question of how has that affected things at the Times, I just would give a little preamble and say I think editing is an often ignored and very expensive to do well part of putting out a good product. Getting stuff up really fast. We've all experienced our web products being virtually unedited. And or somebody looks at it who's got 17 other things to do, and then it goes up, and then it has to be revised 16 times. I was shocked when I read what the Times was doing. And so I wonder, can you talk about that?
Yeah, because I was a critic of that at the time. But the reason the bosses decided they needed to do that was they were facing cuts, and they didn't want to cut news gatherers, reporters. And the truth is that our news stories go through 5 sets of hands, or did then. You had your direct editor, you had a copy editor, you had a desk editor, you had another layer of editing on the kind of front page or the page layout, and then you had the top bosses looking. So they said, can we do this with fewer layers? I was vocal about being concerned. This is our copy desk. A lot of the old-time copy editors who were kind of retiring were warning, don't do this. And I have to say, it still concerns me, but it hasn't been cataclysmic. There actually still are 3 people who read my stories now instead of 5, right? So, or at least 2, really at least 2, and then sometimes 3 if it's really going on the front page. So there's a little more. So I think some of it was misstated at the time. It wasn't like we were eliminating copy editing. We eliminated the central desk. But I miss a lot of that because they were the keepers of our style. Our style is very strict. It was an extra fact-checking. I mean, there's a little less of that. I think there have been you could see more typos. Sometimes I could see in my own copy a grammatical error has gotten through. But the good news is it wasn't cataclysmic. And my view was this is going to be cataclysmic, and I hope it happens right away so they have to correct it if it will be. But it hasn't been, so it's been okay. And on the flip side, they've been able to staff up on investigative and staff up in Washington. So they have to. Everyone here at this table has resource choices they have to make, and that's how they made these.
Any other questions, observations, complaints? That being the case, I'm going to pass the baton off to Gavin. Thank you very much for joining us. It was a lot of fun.
All right, thanks everyone, and thanks especially to our panelists. I mean, I live and breathe all this stuff, but it's all. I still love having these conversations. So again, I just wanted to remind you that on February 22nd, we'll be back here to talk about affordable housing, which affects everything that we're looking at these days. And our March 7th event at Bay Street. If you are a subscriber, which I'm hoping many of you are, you can access tickets right now. Otherwise, we will open that up in February. Thank you all for coming.